Let's go. It's your back, it dey keep passing. It dey bring out the best in me. I dey feel your recipe. Make you give me that recipe. Fine, fine. Yeah, you fine. You so divine. I dey feel you die.
What's happening, people? It's Joel Awesome. It's another episode of Awesome Entertainment. We talking X-Men 97, episode 1, 2, 3, and we're going to throw in 4. It's going to be a long-ass video. Instead of just me reviewing it, I'm going to react to ScreenCrush. He going to break it down for us, tell us the Easter eggs and stuff. Overall, I think it's been all right. It's all right. It ain't nearly as good as season 1. Episode 4 ended very well, though. Episode 4 ended very well. Some of it is kind of, sleepable. But I don't know. Maybe it's going somewhere. It just doesn't feel as great to me as it did. But maybe I'm a Debbie Downer. I'm not ready to commit full hate or hate on it, but my excitement is low. But maybe it's just me. Maybe it's even the Penguin, when I first watched the Penguin, the first few episodes, I was like, I don't know where this is going. But by the time they finished it and they wrapped it up, I was like, oh, that was brilliant. So sometimes you got to get to the end to find out. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm like, where is this going? But like I said, the end of episode 4 was really good. Really, really good with Apocalypse. But he's going to break it down. We're going to watch both videos. We'll see if we get through this,
7, season 2. Now look, we are covering episodes 1 through 3 in this video, but we will be spoiler free for each section. So look guys, if you've only seen episode 1, I will not give away anything from the other 2 episodes, and every episode is chapter marked below. Now we just put up a full recap of the original series and season 1 of this show, but the TLDW is that this show is a revival of the groundbreaking, influential X-Men the Animated Series from the 1990s. This show famously kept the drama and pathos of the comics, but then they packaged it in a Saturday morning cartoon wrapper. Last season ended with the X-Men defeating an army of living Sentinels and then disappearing into the time stream. Now, all of this is covered in the recap, which Jean narrates.
Previously on X-Men.
And this usually indicates that this character will be a part of the focus of this episode.
But the
That's
original
true here because the episode focuses on her relationship with her son, Nathan.
But I thought he was the son of a clone. So confusing.
Oh, you're right, but dude, trust me, the comics are even more confusing. Basically, last season opened with Jean being pregnant and soon gave birth to baby Nathan. Then a different Jean showed up at the mansion, and Beast determined that Mommy Jean was a clone created by Mr. Sinister. After the villain briefly mind-controlled her, he infected Nathan with a techno-organic virus, and then Mommy Jean broke away from his control. To save his life, they were forced to send Nathan into the future, and Mommy Jean changed her name to Madeline. But, as they established last season, Jean has no idea which memories belong to her or to Madeline, and the two of them have a psychic bond. So Jean has a perfect recollection of giving birth to Nathan. So, in a roundabout way, Nathan actually knows her son. Now, there are a few neat things to note in the new intro. The Marvel animation slides include the original X-Men series, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the way underrated series Eyes of Wakanda, Zombie Wanda from What If, and finally Gambit riding Wolverine into battle in their fight against Master Mold in season 1. In our trailer breakdown, I accidentally said that this was from Genosha, and I was wrong. Now, the intro is mostly recreated from the original series, beginning with Cyclops in the Butte in the desert, recreating the iconic moment when the Phoenix held back his optic blasts.
Jean was using the power of the Phoenix to block my optic blasts, and we could see each other's eyes.
And notice that Bishop and Gambit are still on the Blackbird, even though Gambit died last season. Last season, there was also a subtle hint that Jean wasn't herself in the intro. Jean always keeps her hair up in a ponytail in the intro, while Madeline's hair was down in the earlier episodes of the season. Also notice the Wolverine suit is his classic brown and orange as he started wearing.
I did really like the alternative intro they did with the X-Force. I like that. They was cooking with that. They should have... That shit should have been happening and stuff a long time ago. It should have been in the MCU where they're like, okay, we've seen the guys like when they did the Thunderbolts, right? They should have had them kind of stand up like the Avengers. It's not necessarily because they didn't put out some trash and you don't want to relate them no more. But before, if you was cooking, that's how you should have did it. And I like that they did that with this one. Like, oh, this is a different episode, X-Force, and I they did it right.
At the end of last season. And then we get scenes from various episodes. Cable is fighting Apocalypse, which is from season 4, episode 18, Beyond Good and Evil Part 1. And we're going to talk about that arc a lot more later in the video. And then we see Bishop taking away baby Nathan into the future. Last season, it was explained that Nathan was pulled from him in the time stream, and now we know why, because he was pulled into a much more distant future by Mother Ascani. And then we see the Summers family reunited in episode 8 last season. Next, we see Magneto pulling the adamantium from Wolverine's body. Now, last season, I actually hated the way they showed this iconic moment from X-Men 25. They kind of just used a still frame. It looked cheap and rushed, but here they reanimate the moment as a...
It looks cheap and rushed because I think they're using AI. These things look like they typed this shit into Grok and they gave that little 6-minute video and then they're like, all right, they get to the last frame and they just put it back in Grok and say continue it. Like, it really looks like AI to me, man. It really does.
Silhouette, and it works much, much better and captures all of the shock and horror from that moment. The next difference is when we flash to Storm in episodes Life Death Part 1 and 2 from last season. This was when she lost her powers and Forge helped her to reclaim her abilities by fighting a demon. I just say right now, it's even weirder in the comics. I'm doing you a favor by not explaining it. Once again, Morph is terrified of Mr. Sinister after he kidnapped and brainwashed him, and this is followed by an elderly Forge looking at Wolverine's adamantium skeleton. This is from Days of Future Past Part 2 when Bishop returns to find that his future has been altered to a plague-ridden dystopia instead of a sentinel-ridden dystopia. And then we see Cable's group, the Clan Chosen, fighting Apocalypse in the future. They are Hope, Randall, and Aaliyah. Next, here is Storm getting her 1970s costume, which she manifested when her powers returned last season, and this is followed by these two sides clashing. Side note, I remember videotaping this intro when I was a kid and trying to figure out who the people were in the middle. This was my first Easter egg hunt, and I was 12 years old. And one thing I love about this show is how it draws on so many real-life anxieties about our world. Politics, racism, international tensions. It makes it all so relatable because the events of the X-Men have always been inspired by real-world anxieties and events. And sometimes fictional versions of the news are actually more reliable than the news itself because it's hard to know what news you can actually trust. For instance, I am a subscriber to Ground News. It is an app and website that I use every day, and they're the sponsor of this video. So here's a story about the Supreme Court ruling on whether Trump can fire an employee at the Federal Reserve. Now, as you can see, depending on the news outlet, you get totally different stories here, and you don't know what actually happened.
Get back to this
dystopian future. But in this episode, Forge travels into the future so the X-Men can save the past. The title also refers to the timey-wimey nature of this episode, with Nathan's parents needing to travel into the future to raise their son, who they already met as an old man in the past. So the reporter on screen is Trish Tilby, a love interest of Beast in the comics, who ran a fluff piece on the team last season, where Scott imploded on camera.
I lie because the truth is we're nothing like you. Thank God, because it's the only reason you people are still alive.
You people?
We then see footage of Xavier and Magneto statues on the islands of Genosha, which we saw in the episode Remember It last season. Now this is Forge's home where he tried to cure Storm in his lab last season. And then Bishop puts on the same bracelet that he wore in Days of Future Past, and we see that it is aligned to his current year, 1997. On the board behind him, we can see that they are studying ancient hieroglyphics relating to Apocalypse and Rama Tut. And here is a drawing of a wormhole, which is a fissure in space-time theorized to make time travel possible. Now, I should point out that in Bishop's future, he was very good friends with Forge. He actually invented the time machine that originally sent Bishop into the 90s. In fact, that was Forge's very first appearance on this show. Notice that Forge's time portal is a little bit like the quantum tunnel that Hank Pym invented. And as we saw in Avengers Endgame, that device allows you to travel through time. The portal is also a less refined version than the one he created for Bishop to time travel in the original series. Now on the board, we see that half the X-Men are almost 4,000 years into the future in the Atlantic Basin. This means that in Apocalypse's dystopian future, he has caused a war that has completely drained the ocean. Maybe he went to war against another ancient mutant, Namor, and this was his way of defeating him. So they decide that Forge should go into the future since he and Storm are at the very beginning of a romantic relationship, and he lands on the dry ocean.
Marvel hasn't dove into the villain verse type movie, but a guy like Apocalypse, a guy like Kang, which I think maybe they were doing with Kang Dynasty, a guy like Thanos, maybe even Thanos, but Thanos he's not as old as the other. Oh, Galactus. You know what I mean? They're old villains that live for thousands of years. You could show them you could do an Apocalypse movie or a Kang movie where he's fighting, the heroes of this time, and then the heroes of that time, and then the heroes of this time, and the heroes of that. And And even if he win, like they have those situations where the fight is the fight, and sometimes you win but you lose, or you lose but you win, and it's like, oh well, he lost because he got sent back in time, but it wasn't like they killed him. You could do that with almost all the groups that he fights or the heroes that he fights. And maybe they were going to do that with Kang Dynasty, but that would have been a dope movie if you did like an apocalypse movie where he's fighting mutants from, BC to mutants to now, and all the in-betweens. That'd be kind of crazy.
Floor. Notice the ground is littered with skeletons of sea creatures. And I love Forge's laser scanner. It is so 90s and is exactly what people thought that future tech would have looked like in that era. Then he's attacked by Apocalypse's cyber hounds. Now these are a new invention for the show, but they are likely based on the hounds. These are mutants from a different dystopian future who are forced to hunt down other mutants. One of them, Rachel Summers, is the daughter of Scott and Jean, but more on her later. Forge is pinned down when Storm comes to his rescue, along with a very feral Wolverine. Now, in the comics, after Magneto pulled the adamantium from his body, a villain named Genesis tried to graft adamantium back onto his bones, but Logan's body rejected the graft and then turned him into this more feral state. Also, fun side note, Genesis is actually Abel's son, and he appeared twice in the original show. He could also, you never know, be the mystery villain that the show is concealing. Notice in this fight that his bone claws break off in the robot, and then they heal and grow back, and the same thing happens later in the episode. It's brutal. Then Forge says,
Stars and garters.
Which is one of Beast's main catchphrases in the comics. Storm is wearing blue and gold with her hair pulled back, and she briefly wore a similar look before Jim Lee created the white suit that she wore in the original series. And then we see Scott and Jean raising their son Nathan in the future. Scott and Jean are wearing their X-Factor costumes from the early days of leading that team, but this story is actually based on a kick-ass X-Men spin-off comic called The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. In that book, when Scott and Jean are on their honeymoon, Mother Ascani pulls their minds into the future to inhabit human bodies. They are present for the destruction of Clan Ascani, and then they raise Nathan on the run for years. Meanwhile,
what are you doing when your mind is in the future and your body in the past? Am I a vegetable? Am I eating? Am I showering? What's going on?
Apocalypse raises a boy named Strife to eventually be his vessel to true immortality. Now, Strife isn't in this episode, but he could be a secret villain that the show unveils later on. Then we go to Apocalypse's regeneration temple, and we saw Cable attack a similar temple in season 4 of the original series. And in season 5, we actually saw Apocalypse transfer his essence into a new host, which is what he's trying to do to young Nathan in this episode. Apocalypse's chief servant is named Ozymandias, and he is pulled straight from the comics. In the book Rise of Apocalypse, he was the son of the Pharaoh, who was then deposed by Rama-Tut, who was actually the time traveler King the Conqueror. Apocalypse then enslaves Ozymandias and makes him his servant for thousands of years, which is why he is serving him in the future as his final horseman. Jean helps Nathan to use his abilities to hide his mechanical arm, just like she does in the comics, and then Scott tells him,
"You've been fighting for every second of your life, Nathan, since the day you were born."
Which is taken from The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, issue 3. Then Morph enters the tent, and his outfit brings the character full circle. Morph was originally invented just to be killed off in the first episode of the animated series.
What about Morph?
But in the comics, there was an event called Age of Apocalypse, where a time traveler accidentally assassinates Charles Xavier in the past, which causes Apocalypse to rise to power in the present. Morph made his comic book introduction in that crossover with the blank-faced look that they adapted for X-Men 97. And now he's wearing the outfit that he wore from those comics. Did anybody else think it was hypocritical when Scott said this?
So Morph's original appearance was in the show?
I mean, since when did the X-Men give a shit about disrupting timelines, am I right? And then we see Mother Ascani meditating upside down and surrounded by flames.
Yeah, what's that about? Is she like the Human Torch?
No, all right, look, I guess I'll explain who she is. The episode doesn't outright reveal it, but it's well known in the comics, and they hint pretty heavily at it in this episode. So Mother Ascani is an elderly version of Rachel Summers, Scott and Jean's daughter from an alternate future. She took on her mother's name, Phoenix, and controls vestiges of the Phoenix Force. Kind of, it's complicated. So anyways, they overtly imply her identity later on when the Phoenix appears in her eyes. And by the way, she is voiced by Beverly Crusher herself, Gates McFadden. Just like in the comics, she forms Clan Ascani to train Cable to kill Apocalypse, and she also moved the X-Men through the time stream. And she tells him,
"Thanks for today, please for tomorrow."
which is a fitting expression for a time traveler like herself, and it's also a variation of the Ascani Creed, what is, as revealed in the book X-Men Books of Ascani. Now, in the comics, Nathan's full name is Nathan Dayspring Ascani's son, and we find out that this is because he was actually born on the first day of spring, which I never realized. I learned that in this episode. She also says that Scott's season is summer, which is not just a fun connection to his surname, but also because the X-Men live in a period of relative peace between mutants and humans. Also, notice Nathan's musical theme,
It's his power giving rise to his end.
is a slowed down version of Cable's theme from the original series.
When I wake up in Lost Place,
Who
I
finna
need the
catch
power of
that
Old
shit?
Spice.
Man, ain't nobody finna. Oh, that's a slow down Cable
This
song.
place smells good.
Nigga. That's cool that they did it. Though.
Also,
I like
notice
that they
the
did it.
X-Men blanket that baby Nathan was wrapped
I
in,
wish I
and this
was
teddy bear with
in
one
tune
eye,
with
which
the
is like Cable's one eye. But the bear could also be a nod to the movie Deadpool 2, when Cable carried his dead daughter's teddy bear throughout the movie. And then they are attacked by Apocalypse's final horseman, who debuted in Uncanny X-Force issue 3. So, in the comics and the original series, Apocalypse chooses 4 mutants to be his horsemen, which will probably be a major plot point later in the season. The final horsemen were gathered from throughout human history. Pestilence is from 19th century Japan. The Minotaur is from ancient Rome. Death is named Singir David from ancient Persia. And Famine is Jeb Lee, a Confederate soldier who disguised himself as a Union drummer in the Civil War. Now, the hero's plan involves resurrecting Apocalypse's ship. This appeared in Season 3, Episode 11 of the original show, titled Obsession. Just like in the comics, Apocalypse takes over a ship that was built by the Celestials, and they are the cosmic beings who created suns and galaxies in the MCU and seeded the mutant gene on Earth.
Are we gonna see the Celestials
in the
again,
episode
man?
Obsession,
Are they gonna
Beast
go
was
back
able
to that?
breathe
Are
the
you gonna give me
intelligence of the
your
ship's
terms too,
computer,
man?
nicknamed
I'm gonna
Ship,
see
but
it.
more on her in a
Probably
bit.
don't
Now, that
know, but
episode
I'm gonna see
ended
it.
with the X-Men crashing this ship into the Atlantic, and since the Atlantic is apparently drained, they are able to easily access it. Mother Ascani explains to Storm that she can manipulate cosmic events like solar winds, and that's because Storm is what's called an Omega-level mutant, which is how Master Mold described her last season.
Omega-level threat detected.
Now, on the Apocalypse transport, notice they are wearing the exact same power inhibitor collars that we saw all the way back in Season 1 in the Genosha storyline. Funny how that particular piece of technology has not changed or improved over the last several thousand years. And then, when Nathan doesn't believe in himself, Jean repeats the words that Madeline imprinted onto baby Nathan in episode 3 last season.
There'll be days when you're lonely or scared, when you ask yourself why we did this. Was something wrong? But you are perfect, my baby.
So this moment where Cable discovers Scott and Jean are his parents didn't actually happen till like way after Cable was introduced in issues 6 through 8 of his own book. Then he confronts Scott about abandoning him in Uncanny X-Men 310.
Man,
but he
you should've
actually
stuck
didn't
with that
find out
shit.
that Scott and Jean are Slim and Red, the people who raised him in the future, until
Stuck
Cable
with
issue
that.
17. The revelation actually came several years after the
Change
character of
that.
Cable was created, because
it's
the
cool
decision to
changing
connect
the
him to
cartoon,
baby
but
Nathan was
I
actually a
should do that in
retcon they
the-
added later on.
in the
So
movie.
Jean helps Nathan tap into his power reserves, and in the comics, Cable is always using his telekinetic abilities to hold his body together to fight against this techno-organic virus that's trying to kill him. So that means that he is unable to unleash the full power he inherited from his mother. And then, after he breaks out, we once again hear his theme from the original series.
Solid work.
And then Mother Ascani helps Storm to level up to control
Yo,
solar
Cable got
winds.
a
And
deep-ass
actually, she
story,
first
bro. I
used this
didn't
ability
even
way
catch
back
all
in
this
Uncanny
shit
X-Men
watching this
99. But over the years, her Omega-level powers have actually widened to include the manipulation of cosmic rays and magnetic fields. And when she is unlocking a new level of her powers, Forge says,
By the goddess.
because for years, Storm was actually worshipped as a goddess by tribes on the plains of Africa. During the assault, Worf turns into Thor. And get this, I missed this last season.
I didn't know what I said. Where the fuck did Thor come from? I was so lost, bro. I was so lost. It's like, and then I was expecting him to come later. No, it was just that
In
was
the credits, it says that Worf's powers are to replicate the strength of people he turns into. Which means that like, anytime he wants, he can be as strong as the Hulk, making him definitely one of the most powerful X-Men. And man, let me tell you, when the theme song to this show kicks in, this show owns me.
I was lost when I saw
We're
Thor.
called the X-Men.
Notice that when Wolverine attacks the Cyberhound, his bone claws once again snap off and he
He's still
screams
fighting
in
up.
pain.
I like
Nathan
it.
then uses a piece of the Cyberhound as a shoulder cannon, foreshadowing the massive guns he's known for using as Cable. And then, when Apocalypse is retreating, he says,
I must strike them at their most vulnerable. The 1990s. 90s.
I can relate because I was also at my
Bringing
most
it back
vulnerable
for
in
the
the
99 and
1990s. And this is actually the second instance of a time-traveling
He was a
apocalypse
caveman.
targeting X-Men in the 90s. In the arc Beyond Good and Evil, Apocalypse takes control of the axis of time, which is kind of a network between all of time and space in order to rewrite the timeline. And in that arc, he attacked the X-Men in the 90s. And then we get a little bit of mystery here. Nathan approaches Apocalypse's resurrection altar, where a mysterious woman's voice speaks to him.
You no doubt have many questions, and it is my privilege to help you find answers.
I think this is the voice of Ship, the alien artificial intelligence from the celestial craft that first appeared in the episode Obsession. In the comics, she actually helped send Nathan into the future and rode along with him, where she evolved into another AI called the Professor, who is embedded in Cable's time travel headquarters, Greymouth. And in later years, the Professor is actually embedded in Cable's tech, and maybe that's what happens here. Ship attaches to Cable through his upgraded technology. And then in the present day, Cable is planning a separate assault on Apocalypse along with Psylocke and Archangel. Now, in the first Apocalypse story of this series, Apocalypse kidnapped and brainwashed Angel and gave him these metallic wings. In the story Obsession, we saw him pursuing Apocalypse, and in the Beyond Good and Evil arc, he teamed up with Psylocke to help take the villain down. Notice here we see Apocalypse on hieroglyphs, just like the artifacts that Warren was hunting down in the episode Obsession. And there's also a note that Apocalypse was spotted in Genosha, which is where we last saw him in the post-credits scene of season 1. And actually, Cable first appeared in the original series in the original Genosha episode, and X-Men 97 revealed why. He tried to stop the Genosha massacre 200 times. But, like Beast says,
the mystics of Camartage speak of absolute points.
When they call it a canon event and
timelines. We also see various names listed here. There's Exodus, one of Magneto's acolytes, who later became a horseman of Apocalypse. Rolson was the original famine from the comics, and Kairos was the original war, and here is the original plague. On his notes, we see a military ship designed by creatures beyond the stars, which is referring to Ship and the Celestials. Cable also talks about attacking Apocalypse's resurrection chambers, like he and the X-Men attacked in the Beyond Good and Evil arc. In the file, we also see that Cable wants to recruit Sunspot and Jubilee, who were left behind at the end of season 1. So it seems like they're going to form the show's version of X-Force. On to episode 2, a force to be reckoned with, named, of course, after X-Force. Cable does it previously on, which is appropriate since this episode finally brings his team into this universe.
Wait, what is X-Force anyways?
Dude, we are getting into my favorite era of X-Men comics. So in the 80s, Chris Claremont and Bob McLeod created a spin-off book called The New Mutants about a new class of young students at the school. First, the professor led the team, and then after he went to space, Magneto became the new headmaster. But then, after Magneto left the team to become a villain again, the team was leaderless, which is when Fabian Nicieza and Rob Liefeld created Cable to be the new leader of the team. Now, this only lasted for about a year before they spun the team off into a new book called X-Force. The idea was that Cable would use Magneto's methods to achieve the professor's dream, and my friends, it was a kick-ass time to read X-Men comics. Following the last episode in the future, this one begins with a massive title card letting us know that we have returned to 1997, as mutants are running for sanctuary at the school. The kid with the glasses is Quentin Quire, who is featured in one of my favorite X-Men comics, Riot at Xavier's. This is from the Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly run of the comics. Quire is an Omega-level telepath who can use his abilities to control others. In the Riot storyline, he started taking the drug mutant growth hormone, which augments his powers and made him go a little bit crazy. And then he forms a Magneto was right rebellion at the school, which is why he wears a Magneto shirt in the opening credits. But here he is wearing the symbol of Dark Phoenix. That's the cosmic entity that possessed Jean and drove her insane in season 3 of the original show. And the shirt is also a nod to the comics, where Quentin Quire was once an avatar of the Phoenix Force. The girl creating the Bird of Light could be Light Bright, according to the channel Nando V Movies. And when they get to the gates, the teenager in front is most likely Monet St. Croix, aka Penance, a member of Generation X whose power is that she is essentially perfect. Now, she has a really weird backstory in the comics, which we don't have to go into here, but her origin is tied into the Zero Tolerance storyline that was actually updated in season 1 of this show. And here, she turns into her penance form. Again, it's a really long story that I don't think they're going to bother adapting in the series. But the fairly normal-looking kid here is likely Wayne, who was created by Joss Whedon and John Cassaday in Astonishing X-Men number 3 at the start of their absolutely stellar run of the comics. And I think the last kid here is your mom. And then they find out that the
But I will say this, look, man, I like that they got the alternative guys, the X-Force guys. But if you're going to do them into live action, you got to take your time to explain it. All right, you can't rush everybody in. Some people you can throw in the back. you don't need to explain. But some of these people, like,
This mansion is deserted, as we saw at the end of season 1. Everyone believes that the X-Men are dead, and so the mansion, once again, has fallen into disrepair. And this is picking up from one of the last shots of season 1 when the mansion was barred up and closed down. And the kid reminds us,
This was a safe place for kids like us.
But then X-Factor shows up on a helicarrier that looks like it was borrowed straight from S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, originally, X-Factor began as a book just to reunite the original 5 X-Men. However, they posed as mutant hunters, kind of like Ghostbusters, when they were actually finding mutants and training them in secret. The book also featured the first appearance of Apocalypse and Warren transforming into Archangel, and Scott sending baby Nathan into the future. But after the original X-Men joined the main team in 1991, Peter David and Larry Stroman reinvented X-Factor as a government-sanctioned team. They also appeared in the original series episode Cold Comfort when the original X-Man Bobby Drake went looking for his girlfriend Polaris, and it turned out that she just broke up with him and left him for a new team.
And the thing is, once again, going back to the MCU, they're going to do the X-Men movie. You could do an X-Men movie. If you all want to do shows, do the X-Force, do the X-Factor. Those would be shows that you could have smaller name mutants and stuff in them, and it'll still be somewhat connected, but we don't have to watch it. But if you're a diehard fan, there it is, more content. If you know what I mean?
Their members include Alex Summers, a.k.a. Havoc, brother of Cyclops, which is why Jubilee calls him.
Knockoff Cyclops.
Polaris is a former X-Man and one of the first members of the team in the comics and in the series. They're a strong guy, yes, that's his real name, Multiple Man, and Wolfsbane, who in the comics was originally in the New Mutants, and Maisie Williams actually played her in the movie. Their government liaison is Val Cooper, just like in the comics, and in the series, she is voiced by original Jean Grey actor Catherine Disher. Last season, she started off as a government liaison to the X-Men, but she actually knew about Bastion's plan to create living Sentinels. So she face-turned to free Magneto in a scene that we actually see in the new opening credits where she admitted,
Magneto was right.
And on the TV screen, we see them apprehending Chamber, another member of Generation X who appears later in the episode. Jubilee and Roberto are goofing off in an arcade. Now remember, Forge's board listed them as AWOL last season. And when Cable pops up, we once again hear his kick-ass theme.
Cable?
Now in the folder, we see the temple on Genosha from the episode The Final Horseman, when Apocalypse's essence took over Fabian Cortez's body in order to resurrect him. And we see Fabian's photo here. Beneath that is a photo of the Horseman from the original series, which is concealing a post-it note with the names Louise Simon and Jackson Guice, the creators of Apocalypse in the comics. In the bottom, we see Apocalypse's hounds, who also appear in the opening credits. The big guy is Caliban, who used to be a friend to X-Factor before becoming a Horseman. We also see a note about the Legacy virus. Now this is a virus that specifically targets mutants. In the comic book, it was created by Cable's clone Strife from technology invented by Apocalypse. On the right, we see Apocalypse hieroglyphics, including one with his birth name in Sabanur written below, and notice all of this has the S.H.I.E.L.D. letterhead at the top of the page. So this is a loose adaptation of a storyline from the late 80s, early 90s. Long story short, in the comics, Cable took over as headmaster of the school once the kids were abandoned by Magneto and Xavier, and then everyone at the time also believed that the X-Men were dead, just like in the current show. So Cable transitioned the team from a school of students into soldiers, which is why he gives Jubilee and Sunspot this speech.
I got no need for students or heroes. We are soldiers.
And that speech is actually a mashup of two speeches from the comics. In issue 98, the first appearance of Deadpool, by the way, Cannonball tells Cable that they aren't soldiers, they're family. And Cable responds that since life is a war, they are soldiers. And then in New Mutants issue 99, he shouts at Sam to hit home that they are now in a war together. Cannonball later becomes the leader of X-Force, and he actually did appear in season 5 of the original show. Then, in an absolutely kick-ass move, X-Force takes over the opening credits with a heavy metal sound added to the theme.
I would love to go on a blind date.
Also on the New Mutants.
That's going good.
He's actually
sleepy day.
I know stuff too.
Now, in the comics, X-Force was part of this grittier comics trend of the 90s, and the former students actually separated themselves from their teachers and adopted more of Cable's methods. So, in this intro, we see Sunspot and Archangel fly above their roving headquarters, a military transport plane, with Jubilee, Cable, and Psylocke in the cockpit. I actually love Psylocke. She is incredibly kick-ass and has one of the most convoluted stories in the comics. She started off just as the purple-haired sister of Captain Britain, who became the team telepath after Jean Grey died. Then, after entering a mystical world called the Siege Perilous, she came back Asian with ninja skills and the ability to make a psychic knife. Then it was revealed that Psylocke actually switched bodies with an assassin named Quanon, and years later, she became a member of a revamped X-Force team that did Black Ops mission that the X-Men were forced to ignore. Cable's intro uses his font from the comics and also shows him gunning down Sentinels while standing on the back of deactivated Sentinel robots. Jubilee sports her later look from the comics, while Roberto is in Brazil wearing the costume from when he rejoined X-Force about 2 years after the team formed. Once again, we see Cable fighting Apocalypse at the Resurrection Temple, and Jubilee in Mojo World with her older self. Remember, last season, Mojo pulled her into a video game where a simulation of herself had survived multiple levels for years. That older version was voiced by original Jubilee actor Allison Court, and she taught Jubilee new ways to use her powers that we see later in this episode. Now, the mutants running for cover are Quentin, M, and Chamber, and then the scene of Val Cooper freeing Magneto, followed by X-Factor striking a pose straight from the cover of their first appearance, X-Factor issue 71. Then Mystique is standing with Apocalypse while he transformed Warren into Archangel, and notice the small detail that we see his skull when he's electrocuted. Next, we see the X-Men fighting Apocalypse at the Statue of Liberty, which is taken from the episode Obsession, followed by Psylocke and Cable training a blindfolded Jubilee, which is, by the way, great shorthand to explain why she is so much better at using her powers at the end of the episode. Also, in this locker, we see Psylocke's armor from the comics. Now, when the villains gather up, instead of Magneto, it's Apocalypse and his horsemen, War, Pestilence, and Famine, and then we see the Hounds, Caliban, Whip, and Blade. The kids in the middle are from the episode Remember It. We see the girl with the birds, this is Angel, there's Chamber in the back, and they're being chased by this white Sentinel. And I think that design is based on Sentinel Squad 1, which is a piloted Sentinel that Wanda Maximoff created in the House of M event. And then that takes us to the actual episode where they are tracking down the Horsemen of War at a parade in Roberto's native Rio. Now, when War uses his Thunderclap, we can see that Roberto has trained specifically to counteract his powers, which leaves Psylocke open to use her Psychic Katana. Now, in the comics, this was an upgrade from her Psychic Knife that started to appear when her secondary mutation allowed her to create a hard-like construct of the sword. Also notice that her actual katanas have X's on the hilts, just a really cool detail. Now, when she sees into his mind, it's overlaid with this butterfly, which would always appear when she uses her abilities in the comics, and we see the Horsemen performing a ceremony over a coffin. Remember, last season we saw Apocalypse pull a playing card from the ashes of Genosha, implying that, like in the comics, he would turn Gambit into his fourth Horseman death. So I think they have excavated Gambit's body from the swamps of Louisiana. After they kill him, Jubilee debates with Cable about their methods, but this was also the point of X-Force, Magneto's methods to achieve Xavier's dream. Then Warren reminds us that when Apocalypse turned him, Rogue had to save him, which she did by absorbing his Dark Half way back in season 1. And this leads to one of the absolute best X-Men characters in the comics, Emma Frost, aka the White Queen. She began as a member of the villainous Hellfire Club, and she also ran her own school for mutants called the Massachusetts Academy. Over the years, her character evolved not just to have a diamond form, but she also became a leader of the X-Men. She also had a memorable moment last episode when she could see Scott's telepathic affair with Madeline.
Sorry, mine just drifted a moment. Mind drift indeed.
She and Scott Summers had a similar psychic affair in the comics. Also funny that she flirts with Cable, because in the comics, she and Cable's dad, Scott, are a pretty hot item. But it turns out that she actually manipulated X-Force into a trap in exchange for government amnesty, setting up X-Force versus Factor. At one point, Guido panics because there's an explosive on his back, even though his power set means that he can absorb the kinetic energy of explosions and he only gets stronger. Afterwards, Jubilee is captured and taken to the X-Factor headquarters on a helicarrier. And then we see exactly how much of a government stooge X-Factor is. They put the same power dampener collar on their prisoners that Jubilee was forced to wear by slavers in Genosha. And then she points out that Polaris was an X-Man, like we saw in the episode Cold Comfort of the original show. And boy, are there a lot of Easter eggs in these cells. Some of these characters are from the comics, and others were created to be background characters in Genosha last season. We see Nature Girl, Chamber with his mask on, Wing, the Stepford Cuckoos, who are Emma's favorite students in the comics, Beak, Pixie, Angel, Anole, Glob, Herman, Leech, Dust, and these girls were created for the background and Remember It. But my favorite is this girl, Maggie, who is from the Marvels issue 2. She is a mutant runaway that Phil Sheldon's daughters bring home to shelter. It's a very very deep pull to a great comic book. So Lorna is able to relate to Jubilee. They're both foster kids that were taken in by the professor. And at one point, Lorna in the comics even thought that Magneto was her dad. Or, I don't know, maybe Magneto is her dad now. It's really hard to keep track. They change things in comics all the time. So this all sets up Jubilee's kick-ass escape set to Baruch Assault's Volcano Girls, where she uses the adaptive powers she learns from her older self in Mojo World. For instance, spinning discs of energy, skating on the surface, and also a huge explosion. And then when it's all over, she pulls off a Marty McFly jump off a roof. Later, Cable says,
"Kids are tougher than you think."
And he knows what he's talking about because Cable was a child soldier. And then we go back to the future to see young Cable's life turn. The moment Chip became embedded in his body and was renamed the Professor is the day he lost his innocence and had to say goodbye to his dad. Also notice in the background this hieroglyphic that looks like Apocalypse. Now, last season, Cable said he resented those old stories about the X-Men.
Rambling about the adventures of the X-Men. Getting folks inspired. It pissed me the hell off.
But after this tearful goodbye, I do wonder now if the Summers family did succeed in altering the time stream by telling Cable who they are. It's really hard to tell.
These timelines are so confusing.
On to episode 3, where Magneto does the previously on, which makes sense because this episode is about him trying to redeem himself by fulfilling Xavier's dream, but in his own twisted way. So this episode is largely based on the comic book Rise of Apocalypse by Terry Cavanaugh and Adam Polina. I'm a little reluctant to tell you the whole plot of the comic because I don't want to spoil episodes of this show, so I'm just going to point out similarities where they're applicable, and then maybe next video we'll talk about it in full. Now, we are back to the original intro, but with a few tweaks. Magneto is part of the intro, just like in last season, except back in season 1, he was wearing his purple good guy costume from the comics, and now he's back in his villainous red and purple. He is also sporting a beard in this episode, like he did in the season 5 episode, The Fateless Covenant Part 2. We also see Bishop falling through time from the original Days of Future Past episode, and then Xavier putting on Cerebro, followed by that epic scene from last season when Xavier forced himself into Magneto's mind. This is also a recreation of X-Men issue 25, when Xavier full-on mind-wiped Magneto. We also see Nightcrawler comforting Rogue after Gambit's death. Now remember, Rogue was raised by Mystique. And in the episode Bloodlines, it was revealed that Nightcrawler is Mystique's biological son, making Rogue and Kurt adopted brother and sister. And then we see Beast operating ship. That's the celestial ship that we talked about in our episode 1 breakdown. And I'm betting this is also the temple from beyond the stars that they're looking for in this episode. Now this scene of Beast is from the episode Obsession, which is largely adapted from the X-Factor comics, where the team began to use SHIP as their headquarters. And then we see Magneto rising from the Blackbird in last season's finale when he helped to slow Asteroid M's descent to save the world. And this takes us to the episode's title, Rise of Apocalypse Part 1, based on the aforementioned comic that I'll explain as we go along. Notice that the original creators of the first show, Eric and Julia Luld, are back as executive producers, as is series director Larry Houston. We find that the team from the future has now returned to the mansion, meeting at the same conference table where Bishop once explained that Remy was an assassin who was going to kill Senator Kelly.
Which one of us is the assassin?
I don't remember. It could be any of you.
And this is also where we learned that something went wrong in the past. If the X-Men were supposed to return to this point in time, then it means that something prevented them from returning, which of course sets stakes for the end of the episode where it looks like Ramatut has killed everyone. But then we go to ancient Egypt where we see the dome of Ramatut. So this gets into some really deep, very fun Marvel lore that connects to the multiverse saga. Ramatut first appeared way back in Fantastic Four.
This is what we should have got, bro.
When the team travels into the past of...
When the Fantastic Four went back, the first Fantastic Four movie, they should have been Ramatut. Then you could have did the Iron Lad, all the alternate versions of Kang before they got the Kang Dynasty. We missed out, y'all.
Fight a villainous pharaoh who's actually from the future.
Out,
it turns out that Ramatut was from thousands of years in the future, and he was raised in a perfect but boring utopia. So to find some excitement, he stole a time machine and traveled into the past to conquer worlds. And then, later, they retconned the character to make him a younger version of the Avengers villain, Kang the Conqueror. But get this. There is another villain, the Time Master Immortus, who was later revealed to be an older version of Kang. And now in the MCU, we see all of these characters as Kang variants from different realities. But in the comics, Kang is much more about time travel than the multiverse, so these are just versions of him at various points in his life. His confrontation with the Fantastic Four actually turns out to be a key point in time. The West Coast Avengers also time traveled to this exact point, as did a teenage Kang, and it's also when Rama Tut was confronting the rise of Apocalypse, as we see in this episode. So we might actually see a Fantastic Four cameo in the next episode of this show, kind of like how Captain America appeared in Season 1. Notice that Rama Tut's capital city is a large dome with discs that move into a giant superweapon, which is very similar to the design we saw of Kang's technology in Quantumania. And then we finally meet Young Apocalypse, or En Savanur. This episode covers roughly the first half of the comic book miniseries, which sees him rise from Bedouin warrior to the villain that we know in the present day. Throughout the episode, we find out that Magneto was responsible for helping Apocalypse rise above his station and helped him to believe in himself so he could conquer the Pharaoh from a foreign land.
It was a canon event. It's going to happen anyway.
I'm only privileged to dream of survival.
Don't blame
Now, in the
Magneto.
present day, Apocalypse's philosophy is shaped by one principle: survival of the fittest. He believes in eradicating the human race to make way for mutant kind. But now we're seeing what shaped this philosophy. In his world, only the strong were even permitted to survive. So Magnus gives him a little confidence boost.
That is a story told by oppressors who need for you to fear them.
The thing is, Apocalypse and Magneto actually have something in common. The Apocalypse was born a slave, and in many ways, so was Magneto. At a young age, he suffered through the Holocaust, where his people were enslaved and eradicated. But in the comic, Apocalypse was not a slave. So I wonder if they're trying to imply that Apocalypse was one of the Hebrew slaves held in Egypt, which would make him and Magneto part of the same tribe, so to speak. Now, back at the temple, we see that Rama Tut is a bit different from the Kang that we know.
Why?
So they opted to not make Rama Tut into a Jonathan Majors lookalike. But this actually fits in universe. In the arc, Beyond Good and Evil, Bishop is aided by like a weird little guy named Bender, who at the end reveals himself to be Rama Tut's future self, Immortus, who is white. So in this universe, Kang looks very different. Now, when Apocalypse shows up, Rama Tut says,
I suppose it was only a matter of time.
in the Rise of Apocalypse comic, Rama Tut knows that Apocalypse becomes a villain in the future and that he is a key part of history. So, rather than fight him, he tries to control him, to name him as his heir, so at least Rama Tut can be the power behind Apocalypse in the distant future. Not a great plan. And by the way, if the voices in this episode sound familiar, Rama Tut is voiced by John Delancey, or Q from Next Generation.
How about a big hug?
And Ball is Worf himself, Michael Dorn.
Congratulations. You are fully dilated to 10 centimeters. You may now give birth.
Not just a survivor, but a leader.
Apocalypse is leading a tribe called the Sandstorms. Now, in the original comic, Apocalypse's mother left him to die in the desert due to his skin and disfigured face. Just like we hear in this episode, the Bedouin leader, Baal, takes him in and treats him like a son. I should also note that in the comic, Rama Tut's chief servant is Ozymandias, who is actually the rightful pharaoh of Egypt, and this is the same man made out of stone that we see thousands of years in the future. So Ozymandias might make an appearance in part 2. Notice that Nur keeps his face hidden as he did through most of the comic before finally embracing his true nature as Homo Superior. And also notice that Magneto is still wearing purple. And that is significant because it shows that he is still on the side of the angels and that Charles did succeed in converting him last season. In the attack, we see the roots of Apocalypse's later philosophy.
The future belongs to the strong.
They're attacked by robots buried in the sand, just like how in the comic, Baal's forces attack the Pharaoh's men from the sands beneath them. Then, in one sentence, we understand Apocalypse's motivations that will drive him for a millennia.
For 102 years, we have been burning the man. We call it
Perseverance is the virtue of a slave.
Now, because Nur was born into a lower caste, he could never be elevated in the Pharaoh society, which is why he seeks to create a new order that is merit-based, survival of the fittest. Now, for a moment, through the mist, Apocalypse looks like his future self, the self that we discover Magneto is trying to alter into a hero, while the X-Men just want to use these circumstances to travel forward in time. Now, Hank is getting really frustrated.
May as well be a cat pawing at a ball of yarn.
It's interesting to hear him get angry and use the expression about a ball of string. In the comics, Beast did go through a secondary mutation that made him more cat-like, and later Cassandra Nova turned him even more feral. But then he had to play with a chemically treated ball of yarn to return him to his normal state. The X-Men are worried about disrupting the time stream, which is rich, given that they tried to alter the flow of history several times, beginning with Days of Future Past. But I think this episode reveals that they are not actually altering time. They are reinforcing and creating the events that they came from.
Items and you can check in or out must be done so by that time, the library will be closing at 11 p.m.
See, Magneto's efforts only reinforce Apocalypse's later philosophy of only the strong survive. So I think we're looking at a closed-loop time travel situation here. Mother Ascani sent them into the past to change events, but instead they caused those same events to occur. For instance, we know that Magneto helped Apocalypse rise from slave to conqueror. Now, in the climax of this episode, we see that his efforts to turn Apocalypse were in vain, and he ends up embracing the philosophy of his father, Paul. It is interesting, though, that Magneto is the one who is embracing Mother Ascani's mission to defeat Apocalypse, and he doesn't even realize that's what he's doing. Now, when Charles confronts him about this, he admits that he sees this as his penance for Genosha.
Each generation plagiarizing the prior, from these sandstormers to the cowards who sponsored Bastion's smiting of Genosha.
Magneto first made Genosha a refuge for mutant kind at the end of season 5, before last season he embraced Charles's dream as leader of the X-Men. And then in the episode Remember It, Magneto was asked to lead the Genosha Council specifically because Charles was presumed dead. That's why he says that he led Genosha for Charles. And Magneto still has survivor's guilt over all the people that died.
Yeah, I mean, Magneto's basically, he's trying to do what Charles does his own way. But at the same time, if you ain't doing what you do, then you ain't going to actually do it how you do it. For time purposes.
X-Men 97 just gave us a huge connection to Avengers Secret Wars and the birth of the Mutant Saga. Welcome back to Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Season 2, Episode 4 of X-Men 97. This episode is primarily about fatalism, the idea that events are fated to unfold in a certain way, and there's nothing that we can do about it. The show Loki was entirely about free will versus fatalism, and that debate continues on in this episode. And there's actually subtle visual clues that link this episode to the Loki series. So we're going to break down all of those similarities and the hidden meaning here as we go along. So Professor X does the
previously on X-Men,
which is appropriate because he is the heart of this episode. Spoiler alert for the end of the episode, but Magneto dies defending his friend's dream while trying to rewrite time. This leaves the Professor a broken man, but there are also many avenues for Magneto to return that we're going to talk about later in the video. In the opening credits, we see footage of Bishop falling through time from the original Days of Future Past episode. Then we see Apocalypse fighting Cable's group, the Clan Chosen, in the episode Time Fugitives Part 1. And then we see Charles invading Eric's mind last season, which is a big clue about how he can return in a future episode. And then finally Gambit flying alongside Rogue and Remember It. Now this shot is Cable fighting Apocalypse in his resurrection chamber in the episode Good and Evil Part 1. And that's actually a key moment for this series. So in this fight, Cable mounts an assault on Apocalypse's last resurrection chamber, which will end his cycle of eternal life. But instead, Apocalypse uses the opportunity to steal Cable's time machine.
I allowed you to get this far so I might gain the one great power I lack.
Damn, boy, he walked into a trap. Imagine we was having Apocalypse and Kang and Doom and everybody with all the heroes going on at once, like 3 crazy.
Ready for your dream getaway?
You know what I'm saying?
Leave the important details to someone you trust.
Who's they gonna be fired?
So this kicks off the epic 4-parter Beyond Good and Evil that actually is the key to understanding what is happening in this episode. Actually, should I talk about it now or later? Yeah, I say talk about it now. Yeah, why not? So I'll explain this episode because it'll help inform everything else we talk about. So in this 4-parter, Apocalypse finds a place called the Axis of Time. Basically, it's like where all of time intersects into one point, a lot like the Palace of He Who Remains that we saw in the show Loki. So then Apocalypse spends thousands of years learning its secrets and develops a plan to kidnap powerful psychics from across the universe into one place and then use their combined power to break time, allowing him to reinvent the universe in his image. So in this arc, Bishop is aided by a weird little guy named Bender.
Through the Axis, how else? All time travelers pass through there. Anyone knows that?
Who later claims that he built the Axis.
How's a joker like you know this? Because I built this place, I think.
And that little freak has a huge role to play in this episode that we'll talk about later on. And then we see Charles and Eric fighting off soldiers together. This is taken from Season 1, Episode 3, Enter Magneto, and it marks the moment when Eric and Charles had their split.
You're a fool, Charles. Look at them. They can't even make peace with each other.
I should also note that this is adapted from the landmark comic Uncanny X-Men issue 161, which revealed their past friendship and showed them fighting off Hydra agents together. Next is a scene from the season 3 episode Obsession, when Archangel and the X-Men go after Apocalypse. This is when the X-Men discover Ship from this episode, which we'll talk about at length later in the video. Now, you can probably tell how much this show means to me. Not only did I watch the original series, but it was also a way for me to learn these comic book stories that, frankly, I had no other way of reading. I actually used to collect the Marvel trading cards just so I could read the character stories on the back. Now I collect superhero cards for nostalgia and because I love collecting. Now look, I'm not the kind of collector who just buys what I want off the internet. I like the hunt. I like the chase of discovering something new. And that is why I love getting slab packs of superhero cards from Arena Club. When I open the cards, it's the same thrill of opening a deck from when I was a kid. To get 20% off your first slab pack or card.
I was a slab pack? Yeah, we good.
My words are, I am the weak, and the weak must never burden the strong. Seek out the Sphinx and fulfill your destiny. And then we see the sentiment of prophecy and destiny expressed later in the episode. We see that the celestial ship arrived on Earth specifically to make Apocalypse into an engine of destruction, which is fulfilling that prophecy that Ball speaks about. And Apocalypse's entire goal is to create a world where only the strong survive, following his father's dying words. However, I should also note that in the recent comic, X of Swords, Apocalypse has an additional motivation. In that book, his wife sacrifices herself to stop demon invaders from another world and then tells her husband to make this world strong enough to fight off this threat, because only the strongest shall survive. Now, the last episode ended with Rama Tut using his super weapon from the future to take out Nor's tribe. And this is where Magneto starts to dig his own grave. It is clear that Apocalypse is already on his dark path.
Yeah,
he will become the destroyer. But Eric still thinks that he can stay behind and bring Nor to their side. And by keeping the X-Men in the past, he seals his own fate. But this actually has deeper implications for Secret Wars that we'll talk about a bit later. Notice that Nor calls him Magnus, and this was the alias that he actually used in the comics for decades until Uncanny issue 304 revealed his real name. His first appearance on the show actually predated that revelation, so Charles still called him by his only known alias.
A dedicated young aide named Magnus assisted me.
So Charles has now started to walk the path of Magneto just a tad. He wants to use Eric's methods, breaking the rules of the time stream to achieve his own dream by altering the flow of time. And as Eric mentions,
you yourself have traveled back in time and done similar to save your own future.
And Bishop did this at least 3 times in the original series. Once in Days of Future Past to stop the Sentinel program, then in Time Fugitives to prevent Apocalypse from creating a plague that devastated the world, and when he traveled to the 1950s to prevent Charles Xavier's assassination. Later, I'll explain why Bishop's choices didn't actually break time, they actually just reinforced the status quo. Nightcrawler doesn't see it that way. As a devout man, he believes that altering time is altering God's plan.
Eric's intentions may be noble, but he is tampering with variables none of us can fully understand.
And as I'll talk about, he's not wrong. Charles then explains time travel to Nor.
You all are from the future?
5,000 years from now.
And even though Charles thinks this reveal will alter the course of time for the better, it actually gives Apocalypse the idea to steal Cable's time machine in Beyond Good and Evil Part 1. If Xavier hadn't have told him about time travel, he likely would have never bothered trying to master time in that arc. After Rogue says,
it has the potential to be about everyone still to come.
Man, I gotta go read. They connected some shit, but you gotta let us know.
Remember it. Rogue broke off her relationship with Gambit to give things a try with a man that she could actually, touch. But after one kiss drove Remy outside, Rogue opted to stay with Gambit, but he died before she could tell him.
I can't feel you.
Beast says,
democracy may be a few thousand years away, but perhaps we take a vote.
And he is, of course, talking about Greek civilization, which won't create democracy until about 580 BC, which is roughly 2,500 years in the future. Charles probes Nor's mind, just like he tried to penetrate the mind of Sabretooth in season 1 of the original show. He sees Nor left behind as a baby, just like in the comic, and his life as a slave. He's forced into labor, faces discrimination from his fellow slaves, which also explains his disdain for humans later in life. Here, he is erecting statues that I actually think are the moon god Khonshu, as he is depicted in the TV show Moon Knight, and this finally leads to seeing the constellation and this voice.
That's Celestial.
What is Spectrum Internet? It's invincible Wi-Fi that stays on when the power doesn't.
Man, this episode did end
no matter what.
Man. This episode
it's everything you want it to be. Switch today at
So I guess I'll go the far, 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 far future or a place beyond time itself. So to the computer, multiversal war always breaking out. To say that? Well, because Charles has tried this before, maybe just in other realities like we saw on the show What If, but there's also this constellation was called the Gardener's Gaze, because a gardener knows that to grow the right plants, you have to cull the evil that will always exist.
Look, man, X-Men 97 did that thing. The end of the episode was dope. Like, them killing Magneto, though, was tough, man. I don't really like the animation. Damn, this thing don't stop on nothing good. Can't give me one good point to stop at. You know, I don't really like the animation, man. It doesn't look bad. It actually looks really good, but it doesn't. I think it's AI, bro. I think there's no life in it. You know what I mean? I think it looks good, but there's no human touch to it. You know, man. I mean, there is a little bit, because the end was good. The end was fire. Like, and when they blasted Magneto, you can see his chest and everything. I was like, I died. You know what I mean? They did it finally, but I think that was the part that was human. You know, human edited, and some of the talking is just like, it looked like a Grok video put together. Just say this or have Wolverine say that, you know. But man, they was cooking with this one. I didn't know where they was going with the first, 2 or 3 episodes. I think episode 2 was a really good one, but they were kind of going back and forth with what was going to happen. Like he said, like one episode, Jubilee is doing the thing with Sunspot. The next episode was Storm and Wolverine. Next is Cyclops and Jean and Cable. So they was kind of go all over the place, but they connected these 2 episodes, 3 and 4, and man, it started out slow, but I like the end, man. I like the end. They did their thing. We'll see, man. I think this is gonna be one of the shows where I got to get to the finale to really know if I really like it or not. I'm still kind of wondering, like, where is this going? You know. Either way, they doing their thing, man. Apocalypse, man. It should be like 3 movies on him and 3 movies on Kang, and then 3 movies on Galactus, and then cross them all over. With all the heroes in it. But either way, I only have great ideas. Y'all tell me what y'all think. Hit like, hit share, hit subscribe. I'm out.
Don't play with my patience, man, they gone with the flow when they tryna fake it. That's not the way I roll, that's not the combination. You start off with the dough before you start the conversation. No one start the salutations, man, don't play with me. I'm coming from a place they would hate to be. I'm going through a phase you would hate to see. They say this life's a trip, ain't no telling where it's taking me. When you on the edge and you make your next move, better be your best. Before you throw it to the depths, better reinvest. Man, I count every moment and count every step, so I know I'm blessed. Now it's